Do you have a general sense of like, if I were to ask you, what do you think a PMM does? Like, what do you think the role is? Do you feel like you have a good sense of how to talk about it or describe it? I can talk you through how I talk about PMM and how you should think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that you're looking for like a traditional product marketing role where you are taking a product and you're taking it to market and you're like the product strategy person for that team, right?
Right.
So the PM is actually going to be your main stakeholder then. So the PM is actually the one who is driving the roadmap, like making, like they're the final decision makers around what gets built and what doesn't get built. So they're really prioritizing like the features, et cetera. And their job is also to manage the team of engineers. So like engineering resources to them, like they have to manage and make sure, okay, based on XYZ feature, we're going to prioritize like pushing this person, that person, et cetera. So they're also scoping that out with like an engineering manager. The role of the PMM, you should see it as the in-between role between the product and engineering teams and the outside like external market. So you're that connector dot. So not only are you taking like whatever they're building on the product side and yes, messaging, positioning, like putting it out to the market, you're also responsible for taking and collecting feedback from the market and being the expert on your audience type and bringing those insights back to products. So like that's a really big part of the job that I think recruiters probably want to see is how are you able to take insights and inbound from customers and actually help PMs make decisions on what to do with the product? Because the PMM doesn't necessarily own the product roadmap, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the PMM can influence it. So like I would say PMs are a little bit more like internal facing, like they're not in the market, they're not talking to customers. PMM is supposed to be the ones who are like, you're delivering the message and the product to the customer. So you can also get the initial feedback and the reactions, and you take all of that and you try to create a strategy back to PM to, help them with the roadmap.
So for that, how much execution does the PMM team involve? Like in terms of the actual marketing and then data collection?
I think everything. So the execution part is really heavy on, I think, the go-to-market side. So that's where most of the execution happens. I'll give you an example. So a couple of years ago when I was at Snap and we were building this like first creator brand product, like the first few months of that as the PMM, my job was to be like the strategist. My job was not to execute. It was to gather market feedback and research, like look at competitor intel, like work internally with teams to figure out like if we should or shouldn't invest in this product, build the strategic docs together, get PMs aligned, and get like the right products into the roadmap. So that's like the first few months like of my job for that specific product. Then we're building, we have a launch date, etc. In that time, that's when my execution starts, where I'm building an internal comm doc where I'm just describing and positioning the product, what's the use case, like how do you talk about the product to salespeople, creating all the assets, working with like business marketing teams, figuring out like externally how is this going to look, right?
Mm-hmm.
Working with the PR and comms team, figuring out, okay, when we launch the product, how do we make sure that like the right press picks it up and they talk about it in the right way, putting together the press docs, etc. So I think the go-to-market side is very execution focused, but there's still a part of the PMM job that's very important, that is going to be like the strategy, the market research, the competitive intel, etc.
So that segmentation, I think you kind of break things down, and it sounds like ideally what it looks like in a bigger firm, but like at a mid-sized firm, their team is kind of smaller. The role might be kind of mixed together. Like there's more execution and less strategic side. So I was wondering from like a job applications perspective, do you think it's ideal if I focus on the strategic side, like internal impact part more versus the execution part, where it's better if I'm like also have hands-on experience on the execution side so I understand everything they're doing? What would be a better narrative?
I think both, like a combination of both, but also it depends on the size of company. You're absolutely right. Like a larger company will probably spend more time on the strategy part than a smaller company, right? Like I think PMM at a larger company, you might actually spend half a year literally just validating like what product to build and like being the strategist for half a year. Here it's a little bit different. Like we are a large company, but we move so fast that the strategy cycles are really, really fast. I spend a lot more of my time executing. Like I probably spend 1 to 2 months a year doing strategy, and the rest of the time execution and like making sure the strategy is still like sharp. So I would highlight both in the narrative. I think it's like for PMM specifically, having both the strategic muscle plus the execution muscle is really, really important, because I almost think of PMM as like a product-focused strategy and operations role. Like you have the product strategy side where you are the person who is putting together Like it's almost like if you wanted to go super deep on the consulting side, you could create like consulting level types of like decks around why to build something, why to go deep on this market, etc. Or like at some companies, it's not that detailed. Then you have the operations side too, where you have to like take it to market, execute, etc., work with different teams internally. So I would position yourself as like having both the strategic muscle and the execution muscle.
I guess my question is, how deep do I want to get to the execution side? Let's just say if I mention too much specific marketing stuff I did, like I mentioned last time, like email marketing, I would say something like I collected the response data and everything from the email marketing campaign or from whatever other campaigns. Would I risk looking more like an agency marketer versus the PMM profile?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a good thing to flag. It depends on the type of company, right? But like I said, larger companies and maybe more established like tech mid-sized companies view PMM like less around like things like email marketing. They're going to have other teams that are going to do that. Like PMM is typically in the marketing org, the most strategic one and the most close to product too, right? And so things like email marketing are so far away from the product that a different team actually handles it. Like the PMM might influence the team on how the copy should be in the email, but they're not going in and doing the executional work of like setting up the emails, like tracking, etc. So yes, there is risk that you might sound like your execution experience might not be as strategic if you go too deep. But it just also depends on the company. If you apply to like, I don't know, a 30-person company and it's like the first marketing person and they brand it as a PMM, they might love that you've done the hands-on email marketing work. So you have to just like be precise about when you bring it up. For a larger company though, for PMM, you can lightly, like, I don't know how you could reposition it as like you influence the email marketing strategy, or I wouldn't necessarily like emphasize the part of you going digging in and like looking at the responses, etc. Like I'd position you as, okay, how did I just influence this strategy? This is the way I frame it. Hopefully it's helpful to you. I see PMM in the middle, PM and engineering on one side, the market on the other side. When you go towards the PM engineering side, I like put an arrow and I say, think about that is when you're influencing the product roadmap, you're taking market insights and like you're building the strategy and you're telling the PMs like based on the market, etc. Like this is what we should build next and prioritize. The other side is more execution focused. So that's the strategy side, in my opinion. The execution side is more like from you to the market. So like product is built, how do we take it out to the market? How do you talk about it? Your role as the PMM, a lot of times in the execution phase, it's not necessarily about doing the work, like the execution work. It's about influencing it and being the central figure of like, okay, I'm the one who knows how to position the product. Like I'm the one who is the most aligned to like how I want the vision of the product to be when I take it to market and like help the other teams execute on that vision.
So based on that, I was wondering, what are the things you want to hear? Like if you're hiring for someone for that role, what are the specific, I think, signals or like proof you want to hear? Maybe you can give me a few examples.
Yeah. One of the best things that PMM hiring managers love to hear is how you influence product, because influencing product is quite difficult because PMs have their own thinking of like what they think they need to build. They have their own thinking about like what the roadmap should look like. The biggest question that they'll always ask in a PMM interview is, how did you take some kind of like market insight or like something that uniquely PMM has access to in terms of strategy or information and leverage that to influence the PM and the product team to build something, right? So an example could be you did customer interviews and like recurringly you heard like X feedback, right? And this is like feedback that the PM and the engineering team, like they've never heard because they're so far from the customers. You took that feedback and you quantified it and you made a case and you said, hey, based on this feedback and the amount of like customers who are saying that if we built this, it would generate X% revenue, like we should build this and it gets on the roadmap. That's influential. So that to me shows, okay, a very strategic PMM who's using their superpower, I guess, of understanding the customers really well to influence what we build next. Like that's a huge green flag. Another is, again, when you talk about the execution and go-to-market side, I love to hear about like, again, supporting and quarterbacking the projects, not necessarily doing everything. So like I know like an actual PMM is probably not writing the copy of an email, probably not writing like the copy for the PR like release and things like that. But if you talk about it in a way where you're like, I influenced it, I was like the center, like I was the source of truth for like how we want to position the product and market, and that's your sole role, then I think there's like synergy in terms of like, okay, I think this person understands what it means to be PMM because the function is very much like center source of truth.
When you say influencing product was pretty hard, and then you talk about how you find those insights and then quantify them, is that a lot about making decks or like reports? What are the specific signals that you see people are good at making that happen? Because I talk about similar projects before. It's very similar. I got some insights and then I was just visualizing them, translate them in a way that makes sense for, let's just say, our sales and marketing team for them to implement this new strategy. That's the way I describe a project. But I don't feel like it's particularly impressive. Like everyone can say the same thing. It's mainly just a data analysis process and then just show the internal team what happened out there.
Good question. I think it depends again on like the maturity of companies. So I'll give you an example on the extreme side, which is like very mature PMM function. So when I was at Instagram on the creators team for PMM, I've sat through and watched the entire, it is a deck. Maybe some companies it's different in terms of how you would like share that feedback and get like influence PM. At Instagram though, like it was very like deck heavy, and what they would do is set up the research questions where they're like, or like the big question they want to ask is, okay, what do we build next? And like you have your goals of like, okay, 1, 2, 3. So whatever we build next needs to help creators make money on the platform, help keep creators on the platform, and help them like engage more. So like you have your like goals like high level that are aligned to what product goals are, right? But the PMM, what their deck looks like is they're doing the market research. So they might have set up like a bunch of focus groups and they're like trying to get like the qualitative insights. And so they'll use that as well to like supplement the story. But then they'll also work with the data science team and they'll figure out, okay, like what does the data say about past usage, et cetera, to try to create a story from the data as well. And then they come to a conclusion. They say, okay, based on the qualitative insights from the focus groups, plus the quantitative insights from our data science team, here are my like 5 recommendations of what we build next. And here's the potential ROI and like the success rate or whatever. They don't necessarily say this is the one thing we build. Like from that experience, what I saw was successful was they give a recommendation. So they're not necessarily forcing the PMs to like build one thing. It's like we're giving you an option of like 5 things that are our ideas that come out of the research and the quant like research. You take this and you let us know like technically like which ones are viable and what we can put on the roadmap, and then we'll start to plan out the go-to-market phase. So that's kind of how they would influence the strategy at Instagram.
Right. But then when you're telling that story, or maybe when you're interviewing someone, the thing you just mentioned sounds like more like a description or like a walkthrough of what this team does. And then how would you highlight your personal contribution? How are you standing out from the rest of your team or other people in PMM?
Like, so that example for you, right? Like, I think if I were the PMM on that specific project, I could say that I did this and I could go deeper and say, like, I set up the focus groups, like, I was one interviewing the creators, like, I got this insight, I worked directly with the DS, etc. For that team, I wasn't the direct PMM on that project, so I wasn't owning it, but that's how I would talk about it. Like, at Snap, I was. So, like, there was a lot more that I talked about in the day-to-day and the actual, like, strategic analysis and, like, what I did, but you can go deeper in those experiences to talk about it.